purposes. And if all questions to any of the speakers can be put into the chat box, then I'll monitor that, and at the end of the presentations we'll be able to go through those questions to the speakers. So just to carry on a little bit of admin, our next meetings will continue on Zoom until further notice. So in February, we've got the construction update here for 2022, which Bristol and West normally put on at this time. But this year, we're going to collaborate with the likes of IOSH, the Working Well Together group, and also the IOSH construction group as well, and bringing in some members of Conyan and the HSE. So a really good collaborative event for that one. I will give you a link and a QR code at the end of the presentation to how you can sign up for that. In March, we've got control measures for noise and dust, talking about. So at the end of the presentation, I will give you a link to all of those meetings. So we're honoured to have Louise Hoskin, President, and Angela Abbs, Vice President, to share what they intend to do for 2022. So I will hand over to Louise now. Louise.
Thank you so much, and it's really great to be here. This is my first branch meeting of 2022, so I'm delighted to be at your branch event. And exactly as we've said, if you've got any questions for me, do put them in the chat box. There's quite a few on this session, quite a few people I do know on this session, which is great to see everybody. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I have been volunteering for IOSH for a number of years. I was vice chair of the Chiltern branch when we had very, very few members, and built that branch up as I moved into the chair's role. Just like Angela, I saw an ad one day on the IOSH website for vice president and thought, oh, I wonder if I could do that. So I was a vice president for 3 years, president-elect for a year, and now this is my presidential year. And I've had some really great conversations with people since I took the helm back in November, and people have been asking me, well, how did you become president? And it really is very much, for me, has started with branch life. So the work and the connections that you create at branch are massively important, and it's great to see so many people on this call. So I'm not going to talk for too long, you'll be pleased to know, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about what you can expect to see from myself and the rest of the team this year. So my themes are around people, sustainability, and putting heart into health and safety. So right at the beginning of that is the word people. And if we focus on our people and the needs of our people, then, you know, it goes without saying, you know, we're in an unprecedented world at the moment, and we need our people to be performing at their highest. So this is all around psychological safety, psychological trust, and very much putting our people right at the front. Sustainability, you've probably seen the Catch the Wave campaign, so I'm very, very much involved in the Catch the Wave campaign and looking at sustainability in terms of its broader context. So if we think about business talks about business sustainability quite a lot, and we talk about talent management, we talk about developing our people, nurturing our people, and modern leadership skills. So that's where the sustainability piece comes from. And then putting heart into health and safety. I think we've all gone through an awful lot over the last 2 years, and this is about moving on from pure compliance command and control type activities to actually being empathetic, empowering others. So we're seen as facilitators in health and safety roles. So there's an awful lot around that as well. But I thought what I'd do is I've got a very short clip that we have created, which really outlines those themes in a little bit more detail. And I haven't tried this yet, so you're my guinea pigs. So I'm just gonna share my screen, and hopefully you can see that. And this clip is also available on YouTube so that you can have a look at it back, but it really highlights the themes that I'm going to be looking at over the coming year. So hopefully that kind of gives you a flavour of some of the things to expect, very much around soft skills, which I don't call soft, I call them power skills. So very much around that as well. So that video clip is available on YouTube, and hopefully you can see that. I know anybody who knows me knows that I'm very much looking at equality, diversity and inclusion, around creating real diversity of thought. And with that diversity of thought, we can solve all of these kind of big problems that we've got in the world today, and in particular really focusing on bringing women into leadership positions, because there's lots of reasons why it happens, but we need to give women a little bit more support perhaps to take the next step and to feel that they are good enough. And when we do that, we raise everybody up. So that's very much around my themes. After Angela's spoken, happy to take any questions that are in the chat box, but I'll hand over to you, Angela.
Thanks, Louise. Speaking of women coming up and coming forward, years ago I wouldn't have put myself forward for this, so this is really a little bit of an account of my journey to vice president, and really to encourage others to have a go, whether you're male or female actually, but particularly the girls. So I'm Angela Abbs. I'm a chartered member of IOSH for 25 years I've been a member now, and a volunteer for a lot of that time. I'm ex-branch chair of East Anglia, and I sit on the peer review panel for those going for their chartership. And I'm on the construction group committee, and I'm an IOSH mentor. So, you know, volunteering is a big thing for me. And somehow, I've just been voted in as IOSH Vice President, which means that I now get the privilege of being an ambassador for IOSH and talking to people globally about what IOSH stands for and its work in creating a more healthy and a safe place of work. You know, years ago, when I used to attend branch meetings in person, I used to sit quietly at the back. I did sit quietly once, but sit quietly at the back and look at those people at the front. And I was a bit in awe of them in a way. Then I talked to a few people and had my arm twisted to join the committee. I became secretary, then chair, and then I was the one standing at the front. And it was the same me, but just a few years on with a bit more experience and a bit more confidence. I then went to networks conferences and met people from the presidential team and wondered how they got there. You know, they must have done great things to get there, but I'm just a regular IOSH member, really, a self-employed consultant and trainer who enjoys talking to people and encouraging those younger and newer to the IOSH profession to pursue their careers and develop them. And I also have a real passion about people going to work and returning home to their loved ones unharmed, either mentally or physically, which is what we're all about, isn't it? I didn't leave school with great grades all that time ago, but studied first at the age of 29 and then in my 40s. And now I've got a couple of diplomas and my chartership, and the next stop for me will be fellowship. So if you're an active volunteer for IOSH with a bit of passion, anybody can have a go at being part of the presidential team or council or branch committee or sector committee, but you know, set your sights high, believe in yourself. When the opportunity came up last autumn with the BP role, as Louise just said, I was encouraged by a few people to throw my hat in the ring, and so I did, full of imposter syndrome. But there were people I knew who had doctorates and much more interesting careers than me, but at the very least I thought it would be a good learning opportunity. And so it was. I learned much more about IOSH and its governance structure, and also about myself, my capabilities, and discovered the bits I needed to brush up on too. As the application progressed, so did I really get into it and started to believe that I actually might be able to fulfill this role. And although I would have accepted it and tried again next year, I admit that I really would have been a bit disappointed if I hadn't succeeded. Running my own business, I haven't been involved in a competitive interview situation for around 12 years. So I did the application, got through the first sift, and then presented to a panel of 3 esteemed IOSH people, got through that, then had to do a 10-minute presentation to the whole committee, no, the whole council, sorry, followed by Q&As about why I wanted to be an ambassador for IOSH and what I could bring to the role. I spoke from the heart, and I must have done something right, because here I am, a vice president for the next 3 years. Amazing. I've also found that the PT9, as we call them, that's our president, Louise, immediate past president, Jimmy, President-elect Lawrence, and the 6 vice presidents are all a really friendly and talented bunch to work with. And they're good fun too. I'm honoured to be amongst them and looking forward to get stuck into the work and supporting Louise in what she's just told you about and her plans for the next year. I thought I knew a lot about IOSH, having been branch chair and a member for so many years, but I learned so much more along the way. IOSH is literally life-saving work in the UK. It's international work and it's political influence, and most of all about my own self and my own capabilities. So I'm slowly throwing off that imposter syndrome. So I would really encourage anyone to go for it. Get yourself volunteering, whether for your branch or your sector group, then perhaps council or even the presidential team. You'll find it so rewarding. You'll grow personally and professionally and make some true friends along the way and be part of that IOSH global influence. I'd just go for it. Go for it. That's me.
If there are any questions, we're here to take your questions.
Angela, and it was really good and great to hear your personal stories, and I'm sure you have not both inspired me but others on this call as well, so absolutely brilliant, and really appreciate and look forward to watching how you both get on in 2022, and we hope to work with you as I do with you, Louise, more closely for 2022. So good luck from the Bristol and West group, and thank you very much for attending.
Thanks, guys. It's been really great to be here, and have a good rest of the session.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Bye.
Good to see you. Bye. Bye. Right, so I'm going to share my screen now and introduce our next speaker. Today we've got Christian Harris, founder of the Slip Safety Services, and he is basically the host of the podcast, which is the Safety and Risk Success podcast, his accident insurance to address slip problems. And in the last 3 years, accidents which have saved 30 million plus worth of claims. If you have any questions for Christian during this presentation, then if you could put your questions into the chat box, that would be greatly appreciated. Before we talk to Christian, I just want to bring your attention to the IOSH competency wheel that you can align to your CPD. So looking at the technical skills that you want to write in your CPD, we're looking at risk management and the culture. For your core skills, we're looking at strategy, and for behavioural skills, we are looking at, and I can't see because my thing is in the way, communication. So I will hand over to Christian now, and he can start his presentation.
Thanks, Nat, and thanks everybody for joining. I'm going to put up some slides. If anybody's interested, that is Positano on the Amalfi Coast, beautiful part of the world where I managed to get married to my wife a few years ago, so that was good. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Great to be here. First IOSH meeting of the year for me. Tend to do a few of these a year, so always great to be supporting IOSH and the great work that all the members do. So this is what we're going to talk about today. This is my big, hairy, audacious goal, to say that you can stop slips, and we'll talk about why some people don't believe that in a minute, but that's basically what we're going to be covering today. Now, if you look at the data, it might seem quite hard to make that claim, but I'll give you a few carrots to give you some comfort that it is possible. So we've got a lot of case studies and examples where clients have achieved a 50% plus reduction in accidents, which has had a knock-on effect on injuries and claims. There's a science to this, which we're going to run through. So it's not just a bluster. We're not going to be taking the Boris Johnson approach to this. We're going to be putting some science behind it. And I'm going to share with you a roadmap and kind of how people have gone about achieving those results as well. So you can actually see that there's a way forward to do that. A little bit about me, just to give a bit of context. So as Nat mentioned, I'm the host of a safety and risk podcast. This coming weekend, actually, we've got an episode coming out with 2022 predictions for safety and risk, and Louise has given one among sort of 30 odd other people, so look out for that one. Over the years, I've helped over 5,000 client sites to get on top of their slip and trip risks. I've worked on some high-profile cases, so you may have come across this case, which is probably the highest profile slip case, certainly in the last 10 years, which was back in 2015, where a gentleman slipped and sadly passed away in a co-op store. And as Nat said, we reckon at last count, we've been saving about £10 million a year of claims. We work with a number of insurers, brokers, lawyers, and then some big clients like CBRE and Network Rail. We do a lot with IOSH. We do some stuff with IRSM as well. So just a bit of context there. And for me, my big goal is to have a massive impact on this endemic problem. So this is an American football stadium with a lot of people in. And if I said to you, I'm looking to stop that many people a year from suffering from slips, that might look quite impressive. But actually, this is kind of what I'm aiming for, which is 500,000 a year. That's my kind of big goal that I'm aiming towards. If you'll permit me, just a bit of background on myself and where my passion for this topic comes from. So if you cast your mind back to 10 years ago, in the run-up to the Olympics, on a Sunday in May, I was living in North London at the time, not that far from the Olympic site, actually, from the Olympic Village. And this was before kids and before marriage, so Sundays were typically pretty lazy. So my now wife, but at the time girlfriend, and I had a lie-in, went and had a croissant from the deli around the corner, then thought it'd be nice to go on a trip. So we went and drove to Columbia Road Flower Market, which is a Sunday flower market in East London. Got some flowers, had some lunch, drove back, and just on the way home popped into the Sainsbury's in Angel, if any of you know London. Parked the car, started walking down this road because the car park is behind us in this picture, and the store entrance is round the corner to the right. And that's the last thing that I remember for several hours, because a car came round that corner too fast, we think, perhaps skipping through the red light, accelerated around the corner, lost control and mounted the curb and ploughed into me. So that was me later that day, with a bit of a dazed look on my face, although you'll notice a lot fewer grey hairs since that's the effect of 10 years and a couple of kids. So although that wasn't a slip, I've suffered a serious injury, a serious accident that wasn't my fault. So I know how horrendous that is, and I was very lucky to not that I walked away from that, but the fact that I'm still walking, I was very lucky. I could have easily died, obviously. So that gives me a good appreciation for wanting to stop that kind of thing from happening to other people. And if you look at the data, the biggest cause of accidents and injuries across the globe, across sectors, is slips and trips. So that's why, to my mind, if you're passionate about preventing people from getting hurt, this is a good place to start. Just a quick bit of clarification. So some of the stuff we see where people start to get this wrong is that they bundle together slips, trips, and falls into one category. There's a big difference between slips, trips, and falls. So if you're looking at trips, for example, you look at this triangle here in the top left. Falls off a ladder are totally different, but falls off of a losing balance off a chair are very different. But typically falls are caused by slips or trips. And what I've seen over the years in the data, if you look at the AXA claims data, for example, slips is 80 million, manual handling is next at 30 million, trips they don't even mention. So it's a smaller number. If you look at lower than 25k retail insurance claims, slips is about 80% of that category. So when we bundle together slips, trips, and falls, we normally get to somewhere between 33% and 40% of accidents. My experience is that slips is about 80% of that, so about 30% overall, or a bit more perhaps, are slips. And I focus on slips, A, because it's slightly bigger, well, it's a bigger problem, but B, it actually requires a much more scientific approach. So it's a bigger problem, it's much more complex, there's a lot more to it, and there's more to learn and more to do. So I'm thinking about slips then. There are 4 big misconceptions that I see time and time again. I'd be interested to get your feedback in the chat on this, which of these resonate with you. And I've coined a phrase of the slip problem, so it's an acronym. And these are things that I hear time and time again, and we've got to get over these misconceptions. So the first one is that slips are simple. So S in slip is simple. What does that sound like? Just stick a sign out and it's fine. You'll be fine. That'll cover us in the event of a claim. So if anybody's heard anything like that before from one of their team, or if you want to admit thinking that, then it'd be interesting to pop it in the chat. The reality is that this is a much more complex issue than people think. So, you know, signs alone aren't enough. Going back to that co-op case in the Summing Up by Sarah Jane Brown, who's an IOSH member, signage alone is not an adequate control. There was a sign in place when that gentleman slipped. It didn't stop him slipping. It didn't stop him banging his head. It didn't stop him dying. It didn't stop co-op being fined £400,000. Spillage control isn't enough on its own. Cleaning records aren't enough on their own. People look at this as well, it's a simple problem. There are simple solutions. As long as we do those, that's enough, and that isn't the case. There's more to it than that. The L in slip is low cost. So what does that sound like? Oh, it's okay, our insurance will cover it. Anyway, slips aren't that expensive. Don't know if that resonates with you at all. Actually, there's a lot more cost in all sorts of ways than most people think. So I mentioned that AXA spends 80 million a year of claims on slips. If you extrapolate that up, that means there's over £1 billion a year of slip costs in the UK every year. 300,000 people a year go to A&E, which results in 1.5 million bed days. There's criminal costs for fines. So I mentioned co-op 400,000. In 2020, Tesco was fined 733,000 after someone slipped and broke their hip in one of their stores. And then there's the good old accident iceberg of the uninsured costs. So you've got £1 billion of insurable risk costs, but what have we got on top of that? We've got a huge amount of costs that are uninsurable as well. Slips are impossible to prevent. This is one we hear a lot. Can't do anything about it. Whatever you do, you're bound to get slips. So people just don't try because they've got this mindset issue. Reality is, as I said at the start, you know, we've got countless examples of making significant reductions in accidents, injuries, and claims. And P is poultry. So poultry sort of means not very serious. So in other words, you know, yeah, loads of people slip over, but very few get hurt. It's, you know, you don't get hurt from slipping. Well, we've already seen the co-op slip. There are several deaths from slipping. There are around 12 amputations a year in the UK after slips. There are about every 3 minutes somebody breaks a bone slipping over. So, you know, we're talking about serious injuries, life-changing injuries in many cases that happen from slips. And those misconceptions lead to this vicious circle where, you know, we kind of think we're doing it well, but then every single year, just like in the last couple of weeks, HSE releases the statistics, and we see that it's 30% or 32% or 34% or 29%, but it's always there. It's not going anywhere because we're doing the same thing over and over again, and we're expecting different results. So what I'm going to talk to you about now is kind of how to try and change that cycle. And there is a better way of doing it. So see if you can remember the letter T, as there's a few T's here to remember. First one is the bridge. So this is kind of the model that we use. It's just a way of showing it on the page, that there's a process to go through at the bottom, and there are some principles at the top, and it's going from being slippery to being safe. So remember this this chart. And the slides, by the way, are going to be available to download from the branch mini site. Secondly, and this is really, really important, is tune your CHIMES. So CHIMES is another acronym. I'm a fan of acronyms because they make things memorable. And these really are the 6 reasons why people slip. And these are the key principles you need to remember. So I'll run through what this means, and perhaps if you've got any questions, this is probably the key area for questions, so we can run through these in a bit more detail if you need any further clarification at the end. But these are the 6 things you've got to control in order to actually make a measurable and a noticeable difference when it comes to slips. So the first one is contamination. If a floor is clean and dry, then it's incredibly unlikely that anybody would ever slip on it. What we see, though, is people assuming that floors are going to be dry, or assuming that floors are clean because they look okay, and then we find that, that challenges arise. So it's all about here. Do you understand what's going on the floor, where it's going on the floor, how it's going on the floor, and how you can control that? Because if you can keep floors clean and dry, then you're going to see a very big reduction. H is heel, so this is all about footwear. So in order for somebody to slip, a foot has to strike the floor, clearly. Now, footwear is a fantastic control measure, but it's only really relevant from the perspective of you being able to control it to members of staff. So, you know, if you're looking at public liability insurance claims, accidents to members of the public, you can't really control what they're wearing on their feet. But what you can do is understand what they're wearing on their feet and bear that in mind through your risk management. So think about to what extent, you know, you can control it or not. If you can't, if people are wearing lots of high heels, for example, or think about what the risks are for people wearing high heels and try to mitigate the risk with that in mind. Don't, you know, what we see a lot is, oh, well, that lady was bound to slip because she had high heels on, isn't that silly? You know, well, if we're talking about a shopping centre or a restaurant or a pub, of course, people are likely to be wearing high heels. So it's not for you to say that's inappropriate because that's a standard and an accepted form of footwear. It's for you to bear that in mind and try and do something about it to reduce the risk. I is individual, so these are all the human factors. So there's a raft of things to consider here, both from the perspective of who are the people that are likely to slip, because the older you are, the more likely you are to both have an accident and also to be more severely hurt, clearly, but also what can we do to raise awareness? What can we do to help people to spot hazard or more accurately to not be distracted from a hazard and therefore prevent themselves from slipping? Because we can all walk on an ice skating rink without slipping, but we would walk sort of in a Roman centurion flat-footed kind of way. So thinking about what we can do to make people aware is really important there. M is maintenance, and this splits into three areas. One is wear and tear, so floors and buildings change over time. Two is change of use. So if you're reconfiguring a building, think about what that does to the likelihood of slips. And the third one, which is probably the biggest, is cleaning. So if the pandemic has taught us anything, and I'm sure it's taught us a lot, it's that we can't necessarily see something that's dangerous to us. And when it comes to slips, what we see a lot of is going back to those misconceptions. So the floor looks clean, it looks okay, but actually there's a thin film of residue on it that perhaps isn't visible to the naked eye, and that's going to cause an issue. So trying to introduce some science into cleaning, so actually we can prove that a floor is clean and free of contamination, is really valuable. E is environment, so this is things like the weather, but also the built environment, so lighting, noise, slopes, steps and stairs, entrance matting, that kind of thing. All of these play a role in the likelihood of slips. And S is surface. So if you've got a floor that is slip resistant when wet, and we'll talk about how to understand what that is, then you've got a decent chance of keeping it safe. If you start life with a floor that's very slippery when wet, and it's in an area of a building that's likely to get wet or contaminated, then you're fighting an uphill battle. So that's the kind of holistic way that we need to approach this problem. And the key questions, I suppose, are which are controllable and when. And then if any of these aren't controllable, so footwear being a classic example, members of the public, you can't control their footwear, then we need to put more focus on the others. When I show this chart to people, I typically get two reactions. The first is, there's more to this than I thought. And the second is, we're only really looking at perhaps one or two of these. So what we've got, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, is a tool that we've developed so you can actually score yourself on how you're doing on these 6 chimes, and then that'll start to give you an idea of where you need to improve. The next T is testing your floors. So this is really important because, again, you can't just look at a floor and know whether it's safe or not. You have to try and quantify it in some way, shape or form. And this contraption here, which I'm going to show you a video of. It's called a pendulum test. This is what is used by HSE in enforcement. So if somebody from Buxton from the HSL comes in to investigate a serious slip, such as that co-op incident, for example, they will be doing this kind of testing. It's also the testing that is required by the courts. So we do quite a lot of this testing, both for claimant and defendant solicitors, to try to get a scientific understanding of, why somebody slips or not. What it does, as I'll show you in the video, is it mimics a heel strike. So you'll see as this chap, and it's not me, by the way, the hair's a bit too short for me, presses releases the foot on the right hand side, the foot will swing down and strike the floor, and you'll see it kind of mimics the heel striking the floor. It swings through and it pushes a pointer to this gauge on the left hand side of the machine, and that number is tells you how slippery the floor is. Let's just quickly watch it. So he's going to spray the floor, release the foot, swings through, and it gives you that number on the gauge. And we do that we don't just do that once, we do it in multiple directions, multiple times, and then we get the average. But that's the measurement of how slippery the floor is. And it's measuring the floor because we've standardized, this is a HSE tool, obviously, it's standardizing the heel element. So the heel is standardized, and therefore the friction that's produced is just based on the floor. So we'll watch it again. There, so hopefully you can see how that kind of, it brings it to life, how that's mimicking someone slipping. So the output of the test is a number called a pendulum test value. And there are 3 categories of slip potential. You've got high, which is anything from 0 to 24, moderate and low. And we can take it a step further. Again, this is HSE statistics, not mine. And you can correlate the pendulum test value to an accident risk exposure. So 36 is the benchmark for being a low slip potential, and that's because there's a 1 in a million accident risk exposure at that level. And by the way, this is when the floor is wet or dry. So it is possible to have a floor that, even when it's wet, has a 1 in a million or less accident risk exposure. Whereas if you get down to the left-hand side and you've got a pendulum test value of 24, for example, then you've got a 1 in 20 risk exposure. So a lot of what we do, excuse me, is helping people to understand where they sit on this scale. And then what we tend to find is either people are pretty good, in other words, they're in the green, or they tend to be further down to the left. So if they are down to the left, it's what can we do to get them up to that magic number of green. And it's all about trying to reduce the risk. 2 main reasons to do this, I suppose. First is that, again, there's this kind of view that, well, I've got an anti-slip floor, so it's safe. And this is an example of a leisure centre changing room that I visited sometime last year, but it's quite a powerful example of this. So, you can see it's a textured floor. Well, we're fine, we've got a textured floor, we're covered. We don't need to worry about people slipping. It's not until you see this and you think, oh, hold on a sec. Didn't Christian mention that contamination and maintenance and cleaning is important when it comes to slip resistance? So what does this mean then? Well, actually, when we've tested this floor, even though it's a textured floor, even though it's an anti-slip tile, as it was before it was cleaned, it had a high risk of slip when it was wet, because that contamination has produced a barrier between the floor and the foot, and that barrier is more slippery than the floor itself. So your heel is striking the contamination. Whereas when it was cleaned properly, it had a low risk of slip. So it is a safe floor, that you can rely on that floor to keep you safe and to help to defend an insurance claim, but only if you keep it clean. If you allow it to become contaminated, if you don't maintain it properly, then actually the floor is giving you a false sense of security. So the first reason to test is to quantify that, to understand where exactly you are, and to enable you to improve those scores. And the second reason, and I mentioned that we work with a number of law firms, is to help you to defend claims. So David Scott is a partner of CHIMES who defend insurance claims for leading brands, and David looks after hospitality and leisure, and he was a guest on my podcast, and he said, talking about swimming pools specifically, that just because someone slips around a swimming pool, it does not mean that they should expect to make an insurance claim successfully. Because as he says here, if you've got the compliant slip test data as the operator of that swimming pool, you know, even if someone slips, even if the floor was wet, you should expect to defend that claim because you've taken your reasonable and practicable steps. You've measured it scientifically, you've documented it properly, you've collated the evidence, and you should be in a position, even if someone slips, even if someone hurts themselves, to be able to defend that claim. You know, that's obviously a sad thing if that happens, but just from a claims defensibility perspective, it doesn't necessarily mean you're liable. Next here is trust the process. So I said I'd give you a bit of a roadmap. So this is the process that we recommend people use. So it's about measuring. So there's the slip testing. There's also other ways of measuring all of the other chimes as well. Doing some analysis and really understanding where the problems are, not looking at it superficially, and then going through this kind of continuous cycle of improvement, maintenance and monitoring, and then producing evidence on the back of that. So you want to be digging into the weeds a little bit here, and then you want to be making sure that you're staying on top of this on a sort of continuous improvement loop. And when you're doing that, evidencing all of this, because as David said, it's all about, it's not whether someone slips or not, because even if you do all of this, you know, we have seen slips being eliminated before, but typically we're not, you know, we'd never promised that and we don't expect that. What we're talking about is big reductions in risk. But if someone does have an accident, at least you can look in the mirror and know you've done the right thing. At least actually in the event of any action against you, you can prove that you've done the right thing. And the fourth T is take the scorecard. So I mentioned before, we've got this tool, which is called a slip safety scorecard. And this is a way of scoring yourself on the chimes. So you can see on those 6 areas how well you're doing, and therefore where you've got room for improvement. So it's totally free, it takes about 3 or 4 minutes to do, and you get a report instantly. And if you want to, we can jump on a call and chat it through as well. So if you do all of that, what can you achieve? Well, I've already shown you this slide, but just to recap, you know, straight away, if you can start making these changes, you can start significantly reducing the likelihood of accidents, injuries, and claims in your building. So straight away, you can make a big impact. In the more medium term, this will have a benefit on your insurance premiums, for example. So another podcast episode I did with Chris Gill was all about insurance risk management bursaries, but also talking about, you know, how insurance premiums are calculated and the benefits of being able to evidence and prove that, you know, you're reducing your risk. If you think about slips being around 30 to 40% of accidents, by the time you actually calculate how insurance premiums are calculated, it's something like 20 to 25% of your premium is derived from slips and trips. So if you can make a big impact on that, if you could halve your slip and trip risk exposure in such a way that your insurer had confidence in it, then you should expect to see a commensurate reduction in your insurance premium as well. And then in the long term, I talk about 4 Ps. This isn't just about slips, but slips is a way of achieving this as well. So it's about achieving that feeling of protection. So if your staff feel they're protected, they will give more, you know, stay longer, as in, you know, stay with the business longer, not stay longer and work harder, but they'll achieve a higher level of performance. Performance drives profit, clearly. And if you're a profitable business humming along nicely with people who are engaged and feel protected, it gives you the power to to do more meaningful things in the world. You know, you can expand, you can develop new products, you can do charitable and social impact stuff as well. So these are the kind of long-term benefits of getting this right. So if that resonates and you're interested to learn a bit more, I'd recommend doing the scorecard. We can hop on a Zoom and you'll get a report with some insights. It looks a bit like this, just turning a few pages so you can see, get the scores and then a bit of detail on it. And then there's also some free tools you can get. We've partnered with a number of different providers to give you some free stuff as well. And I guess to sum up then, for me, I mean, Louise talked about people and putting the heart into safety. And for me, it's all about making people feel safer. I talked a lot about this on the podcast as well. So, you know, what I want to do when I go to bed at night is feel as if I've had an impact and I've left people feeling safer. And that would be, you know, you guys, because we've given you some extra knowledge today to hopefully go and implement in your business. And then in turn, you can make your teams and your own customers feel safer as well. So that's what it's all about for me. So thanks for that. Happy to pass back to you, Nat, now and take any questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Christian. Much appreciated. There are a few questions on here. So I will crack on with them. So Des Conway basically says, in a changing room, is there a barefoot test, assuming a foot heel in a rubber trainer is less likely to slip than a barefooted heel when returning from swimming or showering before changing, etc.?
Yes, so the pendulum test, you can use two different rubber sliders to mimic footwear. One of them is a shod foot and the other one is a barefoot user. So if we were testing in a supermarket, we'd only use the shod slider, or we or anyone that was doing it. Whereas if you were testing, as you say, in a changing room of a leisure centre, or if you were testing in a hotel bathroom, for example, where you might have shoes on or not, then you'd use both. And if you were testing a swimming pool where people were only ever going to be barefooted, typically, you know, if we're thinking about customers, then you'd use just the barefoot slider. Good question.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Kate Graham says, is the tread on the sole more important than the height of the heel? Some shoes have very smooth soles.
So it's about the material. I think the most important factor is probably the material of the sole, and then it's the tread pattern. But the surface area will have a lot to do with it as well, because if you think about a Formula One tyre, a slick tyre, you know, it creates friction by having surface contact. So clearly, if you've got a high heel versus a trainer with the same material and the same tread pattern on, you know, you've only got a smaller amount of surface area, so you are going to get less friction with a high heel than you would from another trainer.
Excellent. And Jason Scott says, what's your thoughts on the Glasgow Health Board campaign of, and this to make me chuckle, walk like a penguin to Glasgow residents during icy conditions?
It's, I think anything that makes people, because of the subject matter that I talk about, you know, people often feel they know it all, or feel as if it's kind of below them to think about it. So anything that is attention grabbing, anything that will make people stop and think, anything that disrupts their thinking or makes them chuckle or something, just anything to grab attention, I think is great. And actually, you know, that if that makes an impact, then that's a fantastic thing to do. You know, there's all sorts of campaigns that people have tried over the years, and some of them have had good success. I always talk about walking like a Roman centurion, because you kind of if you're sort of flat-footed rather than a heel strike, you've got, again, more surface area and lower risk, but walking like a penguin probably works well too.
Excellent. Hayley Wright asks, thanks, Christian, really useful session. Why do you think slips are still seen as paltry by some in the profession, and how can this view be changed?
I think that most of these misperceptions come because I have the benefit of seeing the whole of the UK, and if you accumulate all of the accidents and all of the costs and all of the injuries in the UK, then of course it starts to look quite scary. But obviously, if you're a manager of a single site, you might not have had a slip for 2 years, or you might have had one every other year, or never a serious injury. And so you kind of think, well, it's okay, it hasn't happened to us yet. But obviously statistically it's only a matter of time. So I think it's, without sort of trying to be ambulance chasing or scary about it, it's just raising awareness that these things can be much more significant than people think. And unfortunately, it's often only when it's too late that people give it the care and attention that it deserves. So how to solve that? Well, that's why I'm doing this talk, I guess, and why I do the podcast and why I do webinars and articles, and I'm writing a book and all sorts of other things, because I think it's just a matter of keeping the messaging going and keeping that education moving along, and just trying to sort of do it, if you excuse the pun, one step at a time.
Excellent. Thank you, Christian. That seems to be most of the questions. So no, we really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. And I think everybody has engaged, and the feedback is excellent in the chat box. So really appreciate that.
Happy, if anybody has any further questions, please connect on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to get me. I'm probably connected with a number of you already, but yeah, connect on LinkedIn and we can always chat further.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Christian. Much appreciated. I just wanted to quickly move on for anybody who's got any questions for the committee. If not now, sticking in the chat box, then feel free to ask us any questions at any time. On the last slide, I will give you basically a link to where you can get engaged with us, both on social media and on our direct email. And I've also put some QR codes up there as well. So I'll leave the last slide up so you can basically take a picture from your camera, and that will link directly to the social media accounts for us. Also, to let you know that there will be elections being held in the near future. So if you do fancy joining the Bristol and West Committee, then keep an eye out for the network emailer about that. As both Louise and Angela detailed, it's absolutely brilliant to get involved with your committee. It can be really engaging and help people develop. So on that, I'd just like to say thank you very much to Christian for hosting today and presenting about slips. I'd like to thank the rest of the Bristol and West Committee for helping put this presentation on. Without the committee and without volunteers like you all, then we wouldn't be able to engage with our membership, and that is absolutely key for us. We basically would like to hear your views. So if you want to hear a presentation from us or get a guest speaker in, then please let us know. If you've seen somebody who's been really engaging, then really please let us know. We would look forward to hearing from you and welcoming you on our other events. Here's the slide that I was talking about. We do have our microsite on the IOSH website. We have our direct email, LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter accounts. And if you want to find out what's happening on the latest webinars, not just from Bristol and West, but from other UK and international branches, then please either try and go on that website or use your camera there and test out the QR code that I've put on those slides for you. So really appreciate you all joining. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the next session. So that's it from us. Good to see you all. Thank you for waving. I can see people taking pictures of cameras, good to see Jimmy there, our past president. So good to see that him joining on the session as well. So that's it from me. Anybody got any questions? And I'll keep the chat up for a while, but enjoy your day and thank you for attending. Bye now.